The Silent Brigade, the descent. The year was 1974, and the dense jungles of Quảng, Vietnam, bore scars deeper than the earth itself. The war had ended, but its echoes lingered in the shattered trees and blood-soaked soil of Ao Forest. The locals called it Ring Ma, the Ghost Forest. Stories whispered in the villages spoke of spectral figures in tattered uniforms, their eyes hollow, drifting through the mist. Some claimed they were the restless souls of soldiers, bound to the land where they fell. Others swore they'd seen white shadows moving silently, watching from the undergrowth. No one ventured too far into Oo after dusk. Not anymore. Harvey N.A., wiry photojournalist in his late 20s, didn't believe in ghosts. He'd spent years chasing stories across Vietnam, from the Mekong Delta to the highlands of Tay Nugent, documenting the war's aftermath. His camera was his shield, and his skepticism his sword. When he heard the rumors about he saw not a haunting but a story-an on the psychological toll of war, dressed up in local superstition. His editor at Site Guy had been skeptical but intrigued. "Get me something raw," she'd said, tapping her cigarette. "Something that bleeds." Packed light, a Nikon F2, 2 rolls of film, a machete, a canteen, and a rucksack with enough rice and dried fish for 3 days. His guide, a grizzled local named Ang Ba, refused to go beyond the forest's edge. "You don't understand, boy," Ba muttered, spitting beetle juice into the dirt. "It's not the trees that kill you. It's what walks among them." Smirked, adjusted his camera strap, and stepped into the green abyss. The forest swallowed him whole. The air was thick, humid, pressing against his skin like a living thing. Vines curled like fingers around gnarled trunks, and the canopy above blotted out the sun, casting the world in a perpetual twilight. The sounds were wrong to quiet, save for the occasional snap of a twig or the distant cry of some unseen creature. Boots sank into the mud as he hacked through the undergrowth, his machete flashing in the dim light. He wasn't afraid, not yet. By midday, he was deep in the forest, farther than he'd planned. The map he'd sketched from Ba's vague directions was useless now. The landmarks, a twisted banyan, a stream that smelled of rust, had vanished. He stopped to check his compass, but the needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. "Cheap junk," he muttered, tapping it. The forest seemed to hum in response, a low vibration he felt in his bones. He shook it off and pressed on, snapping photos of the eerie stillness. A rusted helmet half buried in moss, a bullet-scarred tree, a vine that looked too much like a noose. As dusk fell, the temperature plummeted, built a small fire, its feeble light barely pushing back the darkness. He ate a handful of rice, his eyes darting to the shadows beyond the flames. The forest was silent now, unnaturally so. No crickets, no birds, no wind, just his own breathing and the crackle of the fire. He checked his watch, 8:17 p.m. He'd camp here, head back at dawn, simple. Then he heard a faint rustle, like footsteps on wet leaves. His hand went to the machete. "Who's there?" he called, his voice swallowed by the trees. No answer. He stood, gripping the blade, his heart thudding. The rustle came again, closer now, circling the fire. He swung his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. He laughed nervously. Jungle's playing tricks, he told himself, sitting back down. But the unease lingered, a cold weight in his gut. That night, he dreamed of the war. Not the war he'd photographed, burning villages, screaming civilians, but something older, rawer. Men in tattered uniforms marched through the forest, their faces gaunt, their eyes empty. They carried rifles, but their hands were stained red, and their boots left no tracks. One turned to his jaw slack, his voice a rasp. "Stay with us." Woke with a start, his fire reduced to embers, the forest still silent. His watch read 3:33 a.m. He didn't sleep again. The encounter, by noon the next day, was lost. The forest seemed to shift around him, paths vanishing, trees rearranging themselves when he wasn't looking. His compass was useless, the needle now frozen, pointing nowhere. Panic crept in, but he fought it down, focusing on his camera. He snapped photos compulsively, as if capturing the forest could tame it. A gnarled root twisting like a snake, a skull half buried in the dirt, its eye sockets filled with moss. A clearing where the air felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. That's when he saw them. They appeared at the edge of the clearing, 3 figures in faded olive-green uniforms, their faces obscured by the shadows of their helmets. Soldiers, he thought, or maybe poachers. He raised his camera, but something stopped him from pressing the shutter. Their movements were wrong, too smooth, too silent, like they were gliding rather than walking. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. Another held a machete, its blade rusted but sharp. The third had no weapon, just empty hands that hung limp at his sides. "Hey," called, forcing his voice to stay steady. "You lost too." They didn't answer. They didn't even look at him. They moved past the clearing, disappearing into the trees. Relief was short-lived. Minutes later, they reappeared in the same spot, moving in the same direction, as if caught in a loop. His skin prickled. He checked his camera, but the film counter showed 0. He'd loaded it that morning. He was sure of it. Against his better judgment, he followed them. The soldiers, or whatever they were, moved with purpose, weaving through the forest without a sound. Struggled to keep up, his boots catching on roots, his breath ragged. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, though it was only mid-afternoon. He glanced at his watch. 3:33 p.m. He froze. That couldn't be right. He tapped the glass, but the hands didn't move. The soldiers stopped in a small clearing, their backs to him, crouched behind a tree, his heart pounding. Up close, he could see their uniforms were wrong, not just faded, but tattered, stained with something darker than mud. One turned his head slightly and caught a glimpse of his face, pale, almost translucent, with eyes like black pits. He stifled a gasp, his hand trembling on the machete. Then they spoke, not with words, but with a low, guttural hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. It vibrated through S' chest, making his teeth ache. The soldier with the machete raised it, pointing toward a narrow path hadn't T noticed before. The others nodded, and they moved toward it, their steps silent. Didn't want to follow, but his legs moved anyway, as if drawn by some unseen force. The path led to a ravine, its walls steep and slick with moss. At the bottom, half buried in the mud, were bones, hundreds of them. Skulls, femurs, ribs, tangled with rusted dog tags and scraps of cloth. Stomach churned. He'd seen mass graves before, but this was different. The air here was thick with something he couldn't name: grief, rage, hunger. The soldiers stood at the edge of the ravine, staring down, their faces unreadable. One turned to it was the one with no weapon, his hands still limp. His face was clearer now, young, maybe 20, with a scar across his cheek. His lips didn't move, but heard his voice in his head, clear as a bell. "You see us now?" Stumbled back, his camera slipping from his hands. It hit the ground with a sickening crunch. When he looked up, the soldiers were gone. The ravine was empty. No bones, no dog tags, just mud and silence. He grabbed his camera, its lens cracked, and ran. The brigade didn't stop running until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. He collapsed against a tree, gasping, his mind racing. Had he imagined it? The soldiers, the ravine, the voice, they felt real, too real. But the forest was playing tricks. It had to be. He checked his watch. Still 3:33. He ripped it off his wrist and threw it into the undergrowth. Night fell, and with it came the cold. Didn't dare light a fire. He sat in the dark, clutching his machete, listening for the rustle of leaves. It came again, closer this time, deliberate. He stood, swinging his flashlight in a wide arc. The beam caught something, a figure, just beyond the trees, its silhouette too tall, too thin. It didn't move, but felt its gaze, heavy and unblinking. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice cracking. No answer. The figure vanished, but others appeared, their shapes flickering in and out of the darkness. Dozens of them, all in those tattered uniforms, their faces pale, their eyes black. They formed a loose circle around him, silent, unmoving. Breath hitched. He swung the machete, but it passed through nothing, the air cold as ice. Then they moved, not toward him, but past him, marching in perfect unison. Legs gave out, and he fell to his knees, watching as the brigade four, that's what it was, marched into the forest. He didn't want to follow, but the hum was back, louder now, pulling him like a current. He stumbled after them, his flashlight flickering, his camera useless in his bag. The brigade led him to a clearing unlike any he'd seen. The trees here were twisted, their branches forming a canopy that looked like a ribcage. The sky above a sickly red. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained black. The soldiers surrounded it, their heads bowed, their hands clasped, as if in prayer. His mouth went dry. He wanted to run, but his body wouldn't obey. The hum was in his head now, a chorus of voices, wordless but full of meaning. Stay, see, join. The soldier with the scar stepped forward, his empty hands outstretched. He pointed to the altar and saw Ita's photograph, faded and torn, lying on the stone. It was his photograph, one he'd taken years ago. A group of soldiers laughing by a river, their faces young and alive. Recognized one of them. The scar, the eyes. It was the same soldier. But in the photo, he was smiling, human. "You re-dead," whispered, his voice barely audible. The soldier didn't react, but the hum grew louder, angrier. The others turned to him, their faces shifting, some young, some old, some with wounds that hadn't healed, their flesh torn and bloodless. They reached for him, their hands cold as they brushed his skin, screamed, swinging the machete, but it did nothing. The hands pulled him toward the altar, their grip like iron. The twist woke in his apartment in Saigon, his sheets soaked with sweat. His camera sat on the desk, its lens intact. His watch read 7:12 a.m., ticking normally. A dream, he told himself, his heart still racing. Just a dream. He laughed, shaky, and reached for his camera. The film was loaded, but when he developed it, every frame was black, as if he'd never taken a shot. He tried to forget Aro, but the forest followed him. At night, he heard the hum, faint but persistent, coming from the walls. Shadows moved in his peripheral vision, always gone when he turned. His editor noticed his work slipping. His photos were blurry, his stories incoherent. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, half joking. Didn't he laugh? Weeks later, he found the photograph. It was tucked in his rucksack, one he didn't remember taking. The altar, in the clearing, surrounded by soldiers. Their faces were clear now, and one was his own, pale and hollow-eyed, standing among them. He burned the photo, but it didn't help. The hum grew louder, the shadows closer. He returned to Aro, against all reason, hoping to break the curse. The forest was waiting. The brigade was waiting. They didn't speak, but their eyes said enough. "You're one of us now." Didn't run this time. He followed them to the altar, his camera in hand, and took one final shot. When the villagers found his camera, weeks later, it was all that remained. The film held a single image standing among the soldiers, his face as pale as theirs, his eyes black. The forest was silent again, but the hum lingered, waiting for the next soul to wander too far.